The islands of Hawaii struggle with putting food on the table due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, many people went hungry due to the issues of the supply chains and inflation. This project will focus on identifying the correlation between food insecurity and the dire need for agricultural sustainability on Oahu. It is my contention that there is some historical significance that contributed to food insecurity on the islands of Hawaii. On Oahu, a study was shown that as of March 2021, 48% of Hawaiian households experienced food insecurity. 76% of these households reported on very low food security had experienced employment loss due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Compared to the national average, only about 10.5% of households in the United States were food insecure. Only about 3.9% had very low food security. Even with the expansion of services that fight food insecurity, only about 12% of families with children receive free school meals. Many of the hurdles that exist in Hawaii for families to receive access to food is the lack of knowledge of that these programs even exist to begin with, let alone the stigma behind needing to receive help in order to feed your family. Other challenges families face is a lack of statewide coordination in properly addressing and combating food insecurity.
My name is Phil Acosta. I am the Executive Director for Aloha Harvest. I've been in this position since September 2019, just before the pandemic hit.
Food insecurity and poverty levels interact with each other almost exclusively. Post-pandemic, the rate of households with incomes below the poverty line experienced food insecurity at 35.3%. When looking at single-parent, Black, and Hispanic homes, the numbers were substantially higher compared to the national average.
So for us, our belief based on our mission and what we do is that there is enough food for everybody to eat. We're not making very good use of our resources that we currently have.
1 in 7 Americans struggle with food security across the United States. When analyzing this data, we will be able to get a macro level view of how food insecurity affects us at a meso level within the islands of Hawaii.
Cost of living here is very high, and that is a product of us importing a lot of our stuff. There's just a lot of overhead tacked onto everything that comes in. Energy prices, gas prices. It doesn't necessarily mean that growing food locally means it's cheaper. Oftentimes it is more expensive. And so it is kind of a balance. Cost of rent and housing that affects all that, where there are families that are faced with that reality of where does the food come from, or how much food, or the quality of food that you can buy with your minimum wage jobs, or multiple jobs that you're trying to hold down so you can afford certain things. So safety net programs like food assistance, safety net programs like rental assistance, those are very important. But oftentimes folks that when they run short of funds or resources, food can sometimes be one of those things that can be affected, and you tend to go to, okay, what's on sale, what's cheaper, and then we don't necessarily always look at the nutritional aspects of it, which leads to food insecurity.
According to the Hawaii Community Foundation, approximately 35% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders experience food insecurity. 1 in 3 children in Hawaii will experience food insecurity, and these numbers seem to be consistent with the island of Oahu as well.
Even prior to the pandemic, when we had talked about the number of people that are food insecure, and that could vary anywhere between 1 in 7 to 1 in 9 people are food insecure. During the pandemic, it was as high as 1 in 5 people. That's 20% of people. That's a lot. Certain pockets, some of the more rural areas, I think, are a little bit higher than certain parts of the island, but it's pretty consistent, anywhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6. That's been the norm in the last 2 years.
After speaking with Phil, I reached out to Hannah Emery, the volunteer coordinator of Aloha Harvest, and I got her take on what it's like to be a volunteer and what Aloha Harvest does and what their mission is.
2021, I started as an actual staff member as the volunteer coordinator role. So I've been in this position, I guess, a little over a year. We have food distributions with our partner recipient agencies. So those are the agencies that receive our rescued food. So it's like churches, nonprofits, social services, organizations that are feeding people, or you think of like soup kitchens or a lot of like processed food. So we're trying to, if that stuff's rescuable or, gets donated, that's great. But we're also trying to incorporate and find more ways to rescue that fresh produce, just because it's a lot of times what our agencies are lacking. So with the community harvest program, just if you walk around your neighborhood, I'm sure you'll see papaya or mango, or like just you see stuff growing everywhere here. And luckily we live somewhere where I think there is a great sharing network. If people have a tree in their yard, hopefully they can share it with neighbors or coworkers. Kind of main mission is to rescue and redistribute quality food to feed Hawaii's hungry.
Functionalist perspective. Native Hawaiians used agriculture as an essential part of society, whether it was wet or dry land farming. In an agrarian society, capitalism and hyperconsumerism destroy the very core beliefs of what the original Polynesian settlers practiced when cultivating the land. And as Hannah said, we have a great sharing network, whether we have fruit in our own backyard or whether our neighbors share them with us. In this scenario, functionalists will focus on utilizing all of our resources available and making sure to feed Hawaii's hungry. Conflict theory. From a conflict theory perspective, one can look at the relationship between plantation owners and those who choose to work there. Due to the plantation exploiting cheap land and cheap labor to produce goods that were mainly for exported gain, we can see the loss of cultural connection for the native Hawaiians. During the plantation era, less than 1% of the state budget is committed to agriculture, yet compared to the plantations and how profitable they were, the government provided numerous incentives, and this is because of our consumerism culture that is present on the island and overabundant of exported foods versus locally grown food. Interactionist theory. This examines daily forms of social interactions to explain the whole society. The interactionist in this scenario focuses on the interactions between the volunteers and the distributors. The community is very generous and helpful if everyone does their part. What can we do as citizens to feed the hungry? We can volunteer to assist with food rescue at Aloha Harvest. By volunteering for a few hours a week, we can assist with this food rescue and getting it to their distributors so that we can feed Hawaii's hungry. By providing more nutritious food to the food distributors, this can help secure food for those that need assistance. This will allow us to all coexist and lead to a more satiated Hawaii.